Good evening and welcome to the weekly look at the web, the week that was for the world in Southeast Texas, and some honest clarification on all of the web news still on the way. I'm Kevin Steele.
And I'm Marissa Garrick. This is 1813 News, the archive. We're here to provide an alternative source for those of you still reeling in disbelief at the changing times.
Boy, for real, a lot of disbelief out there right now.
And we're here for some stories you may have missed altogether.
Did you see the continued Antifa violence in Portland and Seattle this week? Western Journal News carried it big time. A mob hit the city hall in suburban Seattle, Washington. The mayor had to flee the city hall. The mob tore down a U.S. flag and dragged it across the street. And in Portland, a 25-year-old protester told CNN, "We wanted to symbolize that both parties are the oppressor," saying, "For black and indigenous peoples who have had a rope around their neck, there is no time." Fox News reports that an Immigration and Customs Enforcement building was damaged. And Fox quoted R.H. Lawson, a Brooklyn College instructor who says vandalism is not violence. Lawson says windows don't bleed and leave loved ones grieving.
There was no more time left for the Oregon Democratic Party headquarters, which was vandalized in Portland. Andy Ngo covered the story along with Town Hall. 5 people were arrested after several days of vandalism. Knives and firebombs were confiscated in Oregon.
CNN and the Wall Street Journal reported Friday on allegations that President Trump pressured his Department of Justice to file a lawsuit with the U.S. Supreme Court and demand answers on the election. Still investigating Trump. The establishment still wants blood.
On the first day of his presidency, Joe Biden set women's rights back exponentially with the signing of one single executive order aiming to, quote, prevent and combat discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. This order now requires schools to allow athletes that are genetically born male to be able to compete on women's sports teams and must be made eligible to receive scholarships that have previously been reserved specifically for women. Some feel this may leave naturally born women at a genetic disadvantage and narrow their opportunities of attending college or realizing a career in professional sports.
This week we crunch the inauguration and what we've seen in the blizzard of purported reforms centered in the executive office. Executive orders.
30 of them signed in 3 days. One dramatically expands the census rolls with the required counting of non-citizens. Of course, federal law still prohibits the voting of non-citizens.
That order requires the new census count to be used in the redrawing of congressional lines. President Biden signed a host of orders requiring masks to be worn on federal properties and in travel on airplanes and trains, for example.
Another executive order puts the U.S. back into the Paris Climate Accord. Another lays the groundwork for the $15 minimum wage. Another cancels new work on the Keystone XL pipeline and slashes about 100 Trump orders related to the environment. TC Energy, the owner of the pipeline, has reported that thousands of jobs will be immediately impacted. The number may not be 11,000 jobs, but thousands of permanent and temporary contractor positions will be cut. Facebook is punishing users who say 11,000. Those are estimates published by TC Energy, which admits that more than 1,000 immediate layoffs are a result of the Biden order. Again, Facebook splitting hairs to downplay any views that do not support the hard left agenda.
President Biden ordered more assistance for the unemployed, those who did not get stimulus checks or report as being food insufficient. The national mainstream media doesn't tell you much about the 6 million Americans who left the food stamp programs and found themselves sufficient somehow during his 4 years in office. But it's part of the reality President Biden seems to believe the COVID crisis requires, a rethinking of that view.
And those are just some of the orders. But here's where we pick up plans for next week. President Biden plans a dramatic escalation of immigration-related reforms. Biden is expected to sign an executive order requiring an immediate review of the so-called public charge rule. That's the rule where immigrants can be denied U.S. entry if they are likely to become a public charge of the U.S. In other words, if they are considered likely to immediately go into an assistance program. Biden is expected to rescind a Trump-era policy that strips foreign organizations of U.S. funding if they promote abortion. In other words, Biden will restore money to Planned Parenthood-style organizations all around the world.
Now, President Biden may even sign an order that would have the practical effect of throwing out the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits taxpayer funding of elective abortions. The White House indicates Biden is expected to sign an order setting up a commission to consider defunding the police and defunding so-called military-style equipment to police. And a lot more is on the way, too, but we'll get to that next week. Only hours after ordering masks to be worn on federal properties, President Biden was seen at the Lincoln Memorial without his mask. Does this bother you? He's miles away from anyone. Two Capitol Police officers speaking on the condition of anonymity say they were told by leadership to send D.C. protecting National Guardsmen out of the Capitol for breaks and into nearby parking garages to sleep. The acting Capitol Police Chief denies it happened. The First Lady, Jill Biden, fed troops cookies, but someone screwed up somewhere with the troops.
Are we surprised by the national mainstream media anymore? Do you remember the press treating former President Donald Trump like this? The press fawned over President Biden with all the fury of a hellcat. Finally, a dose of normal now that President Biden has been inaugurated, said CNN.
And we have to leave it there tonight, but we want to close this evening with a word from Councilman Getz on the Beaumont Agreement with the Salvation Army.
This will implement an unused facility in downtown Beaumont to house up to 40 people who are homeless. Thank you and have a good night.
Hey, sir, I know for a long time you have had a heart for finding solutions for the homeless and the transients around our area. We had some of those hearings. This must be a very nice moment for you.
Well, it'll be nice when it's finished.
Yeah.
That's not happened yet, but we have high hopes that we can get these two buildings refurbished. They're not really in that bad a shape. They used to be homeless shelters. They were mothballed in 2005, and they're owned by the Salvation Army, and we have the funding in place, and now we're just looking to get the designs finalized. And the first immediate need is that we want to replace this fencing that goes around this with 8-foot perimeter fencing that is chain link metal. We've got the materials funded.
Yeah.
We need some labor. If anybody out there knows anything about erecting metal fencing, hit me up, because I'd like to try to get this set up as soon as possible. And one of the problems here is that in this neighborhood with this shelter is that without security, things can get vandalized fairly fast. So we want to have an 8-foot security fence all around the property. And again, Home Depot was gracious enough to give us a $5,000 donation towards those materials, which will pay for it. We just need some labor to get it put up. It will make an impact. Now, when you are talking about homeless people, you're talking about 4 different categories of people. You're talking about those that are homeless because of addiction issues. There's another group that's homeless because of mental health issues. There's another group that's homeless because they've had some temporary life circumstances come up that have just overwhelmed them, and they find themselves unable to pay their housing expenses. And there's actually a group that's homeless by choice. They want to live off the grid. Now, for the first 2 categories, part of the reason that we wanted to start the Homeless Coalition is to help put them into touch with those agencies and service providers that can help mental health situations or that can help with addiction issues. But the 3rd category, those that just have some temporary issues that have come up, those will be easily placed under the care of this shelter, and they will have a place to stay.